So my name is Sanna Garto, and my pronouns are she and her, and I'll be kind of doing my best to make sure that both Finnborg and Steinunn will feel comfortable and happy and supported during today's session, but also that the lovely group that we have here today will be kind of embodying this understanding of active learning. I think that one of the things that makes these Zoom experiences tricky is that it's quite easy to kind of, fall back and lean back in the comfort of your sofa or in your chair. But I would invite you to be as with it and aware as possible. As a little opener from me, I would just ask all of you to write in the comments section or in the chat below how you're feeling in just 2 words, yeah? Kaimai and Nela as well, and Finnborg and Steinunn as well, just with 2 words, as honest as possible. We have a nice intimate group here, so we can just kind of get grounded and understanding where we're all coming from here today. All right, 30 seconds for that. Lovely. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Feel free to keep these responses pouring in. I have also invited both Finnborg and Steinunn today to be asking questions as they go through their presentation. We're coming from relatively different spaces here, whether in Estonia, other Baltic or post-Soviet countries, or even Western European countries. So I think that exchange of knowledge and asking of questions and proposing of alternative viewpoints will be really, really valuable for us here today. When I was starting to do research on what feminist budgeting or gendered budgeting actually meant, I was really excited to learn that it's kind of creates the foundation for, I guess, analysis on what does where organizations, groups of people, or entire governments put their resources to, what implications does not paying attention to the gender aspect of it have for our goals for gender equal society, both just with regards to gender and with regard to sex, but how it intersects with other forms of privilege or lack thereof. So keep your ears peeled for any kinds of questions. I'll do the same, and I'll take the burden today on me to ask the stupid questions. Feel free to go along with that same ethos. I'm sure these sorts of explain like I'm 5 kinds of questions are stuff that Finnborg and Steinunn will also be excited to get back to. But if you have kind of even more elevated, extravagant, and better informed questions, then have those with you as well. Since we have 2 people here, then I think that it will be okay to just kind of post the questions as they come up, and our speakers here will be able to incorporate responses as they speak, and if not, then I'll keep tabs on that and ask them as the session is over. If there's some sort of movement or a glass of water, something that you would need as you get started, then feel free to do that. Right now, just move your body a little bit. It's good to get the blood going as we get our brains learning and curious and excited. Yes, that's right. All right, I'm so excited. I am handing the microphone over to Finnborg and Steinunn. There you go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, and we're so happy to be with you. Thank you for inviting us, and thank you for the lovely introduction. I'm Finnborg.
And I'm Steinunn.
And we're from the Icelandic Feminist Budgeting Group. Steinunn, are you going to share the slides for us?
Yes, I am.
A little bit about ourselves. I'm a postdoc in gender studies at the University of Iceland, and my main focus of research is on gender budgeting, and especially regarding higher education and science. And Steinunn, she's an economist working for the Statistics Iceland. And this is our hobby. We take part in feminist budgeting, or what we call Femínísk fjármál, is our extracurricular activity. So a little bit about feminist budgeting. There you can see our logo. We are an independent group of experts and people that are genuine interest in gender budgeting. We were formed in 2018 by several women with experience in the world of gender budgeting, and we joined the Icelandic Women Rights Association in 2019, which is like an umbrella association of women's rights in Iceland. Our goal and purpose is to promote gender equality and economic policies of the government and parliament. Basically, what we want the government to do is to utilize public resources to create a more feminist and just society. So we are always aiming to influence the designing and outcomes of the economic policies. And the objective is to have a better society for all genders and people in different social circumstances, those that are vulnerable and those that are at risk of being overlooked. We're not only focusing on the government, but we're also focusing on the public's attention. So we try to raise awareness of these issues whenever we can. And we even had a campaign that we're going to share with you later on. So we had it last spring, but we're going to tell you a little bit about it later on. So what is gender budgeting? This is the definition that the Council of Europe uses and is most often used just in governments and just everywhere. It says gender budgeting is an application of gender mainstreaming in the budgetary process. It means a gender-based assessment of budgets, incorporating a gender perspective at all levels of the budgetary process, and restructuring revenues and expenditures in order to promote gender equality. We agree with Angela O'Hagan. She criticizes this definition for being too technocratic. They're basically just describing the process of doing gender budgeting. She argues that we should rather focus on the outcomes in the definition, and we like her definition, that is, gender budgeting seeks to change policies, programs, resource allocations, so that they promote gender equality and the empowerment of women. So it doesn't matter how we do it, we just want to change the world or the societies. A little bit about the context here in Iceland. We have had gender budgeting in the Icelandic government since 2009. This was after the bank crisis that Iceland was really hit badly economically. So this was like the solution, you know, to do things differently and in a more fair way. So the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs introduced gender budgeting in 2009. And we would be interested in hearing from you in the chat if you know of gender budgeting in your context. You could share with us in the chat. But first I'm going to tell you about our context. So yeah, it started in 2009. It became part of the Act of Public Finances when it was established in 2015. There's a section on gender budgeting, which makes the government has to do gender budgeting. The Ministry of Finance has to do gender budgeting as part of their financial policies and laws. The city of Reykjavik has also been doing gender budgeting since 2011. They are more focused on the services that they provide, and they approach it from an intersectional perspective. The University of Iceland has put gender budgeting in its Equality Action Plan. It has been since 2013. Part of that is mostly a collaboration with the Department of Gender Studies and a course that I'm teaching on doing like small projects on gender mainstreaming and gender budgeting within the University of Iceland. And this is my perspective is that we're pushing within the institution for move forward when it comes to gender equality. We have a lot of international research projects here in Iceland. This is mainly my research, funded by the European Union and then also by the University of Iceland. And then us, Feminist Budgeting, we were established in 2018. And we're going to tell you about what we've been doing in the past years.
Okay, so I'm just going to start you off with explaining a little bit or like introducing the work of gender budgeting done within the system, within the ministries, just to, because it leads into our work as well. So what you see is the gender budgeting annual cycle, which is published by the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs. They have a steering committee in that ministry on gender budgeting, and this cycle shows both work that is done solely by the people working on gender budgeting, but as well how their work intersects with work of the government. So first you see a 5-year rolling plan for gender budgeting. This is where they frame the work of the committee, and we're somewhere in the later part of the 5-year plan, rolling plan now. But an example of a project that is listed in the 5-year rolling plan is, for example, improved gender disaggregated data, which is required to improve the gender analysis. So in this 5-year rolling plan, they have a strategy on how to achieve this within 5 years. But then there is the physical strategy plan. This is the government's main long-term objectives for physical policy over a period of 5 years. So here the government makes decisions on social and economic priorities. This year, the physical plan was for 2022 to 2026, was introduced this year, and it usually contains a small chapter on gender budgeting and equality by the committee. And then there is Minister's annual reports, and then the budget bill. The budget bill is the Treasury's annual budget and contains estimates of federal government income and spending for the upcoming year. So here the committee outlines the impact of changes in revenue and expenditure policies on gender equality targets. So this kind of is connected to the work of the physical strategy plan, given that there they list the objectives. And then the budget bill is supposed to show how the government's going to spend money to meet those objectives. Then there's the annual plan for gender budgeting, as well as a base report on gender budgeting. And in the base report, you will find an analysis of government expenditure areas, which is updated annually and covers challenges in each area. And these areas are foreign affairs, innovation, transport, healthcare, education, environment, all of them. And this they kind of use leading into the work of the fiscal strategy plan to list out the challenges for the work of the next fiscal strategy plan. And you might look at this and think, then why do they need activism within gender budgeting if they have such a good system within the system? But well, if the system had completely and successfully implemented gender budgeting in the last decade or so, there wouldn't be any need for work outside of the system to influence authorities like the work that we do. But this is not the case, and our group has repeatedly pointed out that the economic policies are not gender sensitive enough. They are often perceived to be gender neutral, when in fact the gender impact flies under the radar and is unnoticed by authorities. And on top of that, too often gender analysis, which is done within the system, doesn't improve the policies in the end. So the point of the analysis is lost along the way. It is therefore not enough to apply gender budgeting tools within the system if it doesn't improve the policies and the decisions implemented by authorities. So being activists ourselves, not being a part of the system, it allows us the liberty of radical critique towards the government's action. And being outsiders as well, it also provides us with some sort of like nuanced look on the matter, which I think is boosted by our like the diverse experiences of us in the group, which you may not find within the system. So we have educational backgrounds in gender studies, sociology, economics, business administration, and much more. So in our view, the government benefits from an independent radical critique on how their gender budgeting is going. But I should clarify that the problem is first and foremost the lack of political interest, if you can say, and dedication. There is a good level of professionalism within the system, but it lacks a more hands-on leadership from all the members of government to have for the gender budgeting to have serious and long-lasting effects. But then we do our analysis and work both to influence politicians, but also to influence the public, which is of course related. So by influencing the public, we get the public to realize why this is important, which then helps us in influencing politicians. But by framing just how economic policies are gendered and how they influence people from different socioeconomic backgrounds differently, we try and get people to realize why it is important to push for more equal and fair economic policies. But yeah, Finnborg is going to tell us how we organize our work.
So basically where the red arrows are, that's where we come in, like most efforts go in there. So when they published the physical strategy plan in March, April, we write, we look at it and we compare it to the base report on gender budgeting. The base report is basically all the problems that we have when it comes to gender inequality here in Iceland. They talk about, the labor market, like Steinunn mentioned earlier, like the labor market, the schools, etc. And in the perfect world, the physical strategy plan should respond to those problems. We want to improve those problems in the upcoming 5 years. However, in the past years, so the knowledge is there within the system, as Steinunn pointed out. But in the past few years, since we started doing it, the physical strategy plan is not doing that. It just continues as before. So that's what we are raising mostly in our formal comments. So we write formal comments to the committee of the finance committee at the parliament, and we comment on the physical strategy plan and how they are not doing what they're supposed to do in accordance to the law. Then in the perfect world, let's say if the physical strategy plan would be responding to the problems that we have in the report on gender budgeting, then in the budget bill, we would be executing that. We would be putting our money towards, changing the outcomes, and this would be the circles. But then again, the budget bill talks to the physical strategy plan, so of course, it's not responding to the problems that we have in society. And then we come in again, we write a formal comment to the parliament comment committee. So we're doing it on this formal level, but we also try to raise awareness of this, like within the public. We use our social media. We try to go to the media with our comments, and we have actually had great response. The committee always invites us. They're actually suspiciously happy to see us every year or twice a year. because but I think they want to change. Many of them want to change the system, but they don't see the solutions. I think, like, they don't see how this all talks together, all these systems. But it's also like a political matter. If you want to change the resources, that means you're taking resources from something else. You're moving resources around, and that's a political matter. And these power relations are something that people are not often willing to do, to change. But we also, we go to the committee, but we haven't seen any changes. What we've actually seen is like the changes in the mentality among the committee members. They are actually understanding gender budgeting more and more, the more often we come in. They are positive to the perspectives that we bring in, but they don't change anything. What else? We see that the public, the awareness among the public is raising as well, but we also do other bills. So if we have any issues in the parliament that are regarding gender, we also try to take part in that. For example, in the changes of the VAT, the parental leave. So we're also lobbying on other issues as well. But our main focus is on the economic policies. There are some questions I think are relevant to that. How did you create a strong relationship with the government institution in a short time? So Iceland is a small country, and that's actually benefiting us because those, like Steinunn was saying, like within the system, there is a great expertise, and we have personal connections with those people because the feminist society, they're femocrats, and like the feminist society in Iceland is quite small, so we talk among each other, and that's how we came up with the idea of forming, like, this was something was lacking. We have the knowledge within the system, but the decision making hasn't gone through. That's what's lacking in Iceland. And then what's better than to push forward the decision making? That's activism, raising awareness among the public. So I think the connections were there beforehand because of the size of the society. But when it comes to formal comments to the parliament, everybody can submit comments to bills in Iceland. You just like submit them. And most associations are invited to meet the committees, and also some individuals as well. So I think, yeah, right, Steinunn? I don't think there is, that's just a formal procedures of how the government works. Also, something I want to mention is that I think because we were something that the Gender Budgeting Steering Committee thought that was needed in Iceland, they actually included us in the annual, the 5-year rolling plan for gender budgeting. Yeah. We meet them, the gender budgeting experts, every year. We're supposed to do, but COVID has been changing that plan, but we're supposed to be meeting them every year, discussing how to move these issues forward within the government. So our collaboration is also formalized. I hope that answered your questions. Other questions, Steinunn, are they? I'm on an iPad. Can you elaborate on what kind of gender disaggregated data is used in gender budgeting, or that you advocate for being used? If it has been used, then since when? Why was it included before? Was there no relevant data, or isn't it disaggregated enough?
I think what's a part of the 5-year rolling plan now is better disaggregated data. So they have data, but they're also, I think, kind of advocating for more disaggregated, in the sense of, like, you have more information about people's socioeconomic status. So it's not just on gender, which gives them a little bit of a better, it allows for better analysis within the committee. But for the I think we've always had, or like in the recent years, we've had quite, we're lucky in that way to have quite good data.
But in my opinion, if I can follow up on that, is that what we see in research is that data is often used as a hindrance for moving forward.
Mm.
It's like, oh, we don't have the data. We only have data since 2016, so we can't, like things have magically, changed. These are structural inequalities that we have in society, and we know what's like the biggest challenges. So I think data is often used as an excuse for not moving forward, because you want to have the exact amount. But however, in my opinion, that's often the case. But like Steinunn says, we have pretty good data, but I think it's just to improve the decision making, and that's of course it improves the decision making if you build it on the most recent data. But however, I think that should not stop us from taking action, but be mindful of that. We are activists, so of course we say that, but we're not working within the government.
Yeah. Do I continue, Finnborg?
Yes, just we should maybe respond to Sanna's question on example, what kind of data has been very valuable? Salary data, service user data, what else?
So for our work, we're fortunate enough to have the work done within the system. So we kind of rely on the work of the Gender Budgeting Committee. But then we will tell you about the project that we did, the COVID economic measures, which is different from the work that we usually do. But yeah, the base report on gender budgeting gives us pretty sound evidence for the
and that's also we're privileged in a way that the government has this. So the committee is never, how do you say, not taking our concerns seriously, because this has already been published by the government. So this is status of inequalities and discrimination within Iceland, and we just point to that. And that has made our work a lot easier. So we don't have to argue about, how do you account for gender pay gap, for example. It's just a typical discussion when it comes to, how do you calculate that? Do you use this method or that method? Is that correct? We don't have to do that. The government has already put forward the status, and we just like, hey, why aren't you responding to your own work?
But yeah, then it's the part of it that is influencing the public, and we try to be as active as we can on social media. So we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, we are on Facebook, we have our website where we post news about the work that we're doing, the comments that we make on bills, as well as our analysis and reviews. Try to update everything there to make people aware of what we're doing, and then we share that on social media. And then we try as well to use every opportunity to influence the public through media, as Finnborg mentioned, doing interviews, writing articles. Two of these are from the campaign and analysis we did on the COVID economic measures that we've talked a little bit about, and we'll go into depth into, which got a bit of attention as planned. And then we recently hosted a meeting with candidates from every political party leading up to the general elections that we had now in September. This was done in collaboration with the Women's Rights Association, because we felt like the debates on TV leading up to the elections didn't really cover gender issues or equality issues, and it didn't seem to be a hot topic of this election. So we took matters into our own hands and got members from every party to come and discuss the gender pay gap, unpaid care work in the home, and such. So and this was recorded, and now we can use their answers to kind of, this is what you said during the meeting and such. And then we all recently hosted a book club when the book Invisible Women was translated to Icelandic. So we have kind of our ways to get to the public and try and influence and get people to understand the importance of gender budgeting. And then we also participate in Kynjaþing every year, which is a feminist assembly, quite similar to this one that you're hosting, but in a smaller scale, hosted by the Women's Rights Association as well. So a democratic and feminist forum for the public. And yeah.
So we're gonna share with you our project on COVID-19. So we got funding from the Icelandic Gender Equality Fund in June 2020, which is ironically hosted and funded by the government of Iceland, the Prime Minister of Iceland. So basically they gave us money to criticize her government, which we did gladly. We got money to do this campaign. So we analyzed the economic response to COVID-19 from a feminist perspective. We only took 2020 because, of course, when we applied for the funding, we thought this was going to be a short-term issue, but we're still dealing with that like everyone else. So we analyzed 2020 and we did the campaign in March 2021. So, of course, we saw that we had big challenges regarding gender equality in COVID-19. And the biggest issues in Iceland were impact on gender, on employment, the welfare system, future welfare cuts, and women's health and economic safety. It would be great if there have been similar projects in your national context. You could definitely, it would be great if you could put that those examples into the chat so we could talk about them afterwards. What was I saying? Yeah. And so this project was combined with our analysis. We did an analysis of the economic response in 2020, and we also, the objective was campaigning, raising awareness of how these important economic responses are influencing gender and other inequalities in Iceland. And all those nice pictures you see on our slideshow, we got money and to do our website and do all those, logo and all that stuff. We were quite poor before that. I think, in short, we found that the government economic policies and response were actually quite gender biased, as it was mostly benefiting men, at least men more than women. And we saw it was also intersecting with other power relations. We are always trying to be mindful of intersectionality. However, data is now I sound like the government, but data is often lacking. But we are really mindful in that context of COVID-19 and the economic response. We saw like job loss, that this intersects not only with gender, but also class and nationality, at least here in Iceland. And from our analysis, our message to the government and to the public was that the government needs to do more so that the economic policies benefits all gender, and especially our focus was mainly on creating job opportunities and prevent poverty, because that was a scary issue that we saw during the pandemic. And we're going to show you some examples from our project now in the following slides before we can continue and talk more to you and hear what you have to say.
Okay, so we'll start with employment and unemployment. So the COVID economic crisis hit here tourism and service sectors the hardest. These industries are largely employed by women, foreign workers, and young people, often students. So these are the group that are generally have less scope to deal with and respond to economic shocks because of their socioeconomic status, and are therefore more vulnerable to job and income losses. This is something that we tried to highlight throughout our analysis. So this group that was hit the hardest in terms of employment was very different from the group that was hit the hardest during the financial crisis in 2008-9. But still some, and in our view, way too many of the economic measures that were intended to be employment generating were similar to the ones used in the last crisis. So it was like, yeah, it kind of looked from the outside like the government was in quite a rush to put out measures, and they were, in our view, very typical crisis measures in a crisis that was not at all typical. So they did therefore not benefit the groups that were hit hardest during the crisis, and many of them had to do with construction work and renovation of houses, cars, and such. And to us, it's quite obvious that the vast majority of these jobs are that were created would be done by men, as more than 95% of the people in these industries are men. And then as well, the government extended the income-related unemployment benefits from 3 months to 6 months during the crisis. And we, because of the gender pay gap, as well as young people and foreign workers are more likely to work in low-income sectors, in service and tourism, this measure didn't benefit the people that were hardest hit. This is a lesson we should have learned from the financial crisis, as men received 70% of the income-related unemployment benefits at the time. So we pointed out that general unemployment benefits needed to be raised, and general unemployment or general benefit periods needed to be extended to prevent people from falling into poverty. And then it's the general question of whether government funding is going where it's needed. So it doesn't always have a gender impact in a sense. Often it's just money that's spent on things that are not at all important and could be put towards helping people in need. And so some of the measures, so the government allowed the public to withdraw their private pension savings. So this is a part of the pension system that's your own private savings. It's voluntary. This is they've done this before, but we know that this is going to only be suitable for people who have been longer on the labor markets, are working full time, and to have an average income or higher. And we know that women are more likely to work part-time. They're generally in lower income sectors and have take more time off from paid work due to heavier care burden. So women they therefore generally have lower personal pension savings. And for people in vulnerable positions, withdrawing your pensions early can have severe impact on your income later in life. And this is if you have any. But then another example is a travel gift that the government spent ridiculous amount of money on. It was an action taken to support the tourism industry. So it was a grant from the government to the public, to Icelandic households, to spend specifically on tourism domestically. And turns out it ended up in the hands of companies that weren't significantly impacted by the crisis and are now just in a stronger position. This is, for example, oil and gas companies and international restaurant chains and such. So we tried to push for the idea that we needed more specific and strategic measures to reach the people in need. Try and stop the government from like using measures that don't really benefit the people hit in the crisis.
So those posters that you see, those are from our campaign that we actually bombarded on Facebook and Instagram. We were so annoying. Turns out, yeah, the advertisement agency asked us like, who is your target group? And we were like, everyone. And I think seriously, we reached everyone in Iceland. People were like getting, people that are not interested were getting pretty annoyed by those feminists. But this one is quite funny. It says, because the government was always talking about profitable investment. So it says profitable investment equals, and this word has a double meaning. It has either profitable investment in concrete, question mark, but concrete, this word steypa has a double meaning in Iceland. It also means nonsense. So we're asking like, you know, so we were trying to be clever like that and creating discussions in Iceland, and I think it quite worked well. But the previous one that Steinunn had, it says mom also needs to work, because all the job generating actions were mostly benefiting men, and this was exactly that. We were spending ridiculous amounts of money and are planning to do that. Of course, in important investment measures, we're all not saying that these aren't important, but we also need other measures. You know, we need to invest in sectors where women are also, and these people that were mostly affected are working. Those that were working with concrete or like in building and transport, they were not hit hard by the COVID pandemic. So we saw that this investment measures, they were only mostly creating jobs for men. And we were also raising awareness of that the costs are mostly going out of the country instead of going into the system, because, you know, we have to buy oil and machinery, etc. So we were raising awareness of it should not be limited to concrete, and we need more investment in social and healthcare services that creates numerous jobs, and the cost goes largely to people wages that goes back into the economy. And it would be great if you could share with us if these discussions on investment have been going on regarding COVID-19 in your country. Like, is this an international trend? Like Steinunn said earlier, this is like a typical response to a recession, but COVID-19 is not a normal recession. So the next one, we also, Iceland wants to be like the next big innovation, you know, country, you know, typical. I think these discussions, these discourses also in your countries, I guess, everyone is turning towards innovation. And so we did an assessment on the innovation funds. What is the government funding when it comes to innovation? And what we saw that, well, they're spending a lot of more money, great for them, and the aim was to promote this development, growth, and increased competitiveness of the Icelandic economy. So, you know, innovation for our economy. And we analyzed those competitive innovative funds and startup funds. And you can see there are a lot of millions there. And what we found out is that most of the funding went to men, and the government knew that beforehand. They knew that these funds had already been funding men and more likely to serve men and men-dominated industries than women. And what we were raising awareness of, and I'm going to show you data in the next slide, but first I want to put forward here is that the government has also these objectives of not only, you know, of course the government wants to be competitive, but we also have law and regulations on justice and fairness. We have the Act on Equal Status, and no, that's the old act. The new act is the Act on Equal Status and Equal Opportunities of all genders, or irrespective of genders. And we also have the Act of Public Finances. So the government should be working towards those objectives by creating different types of funds. Because how do we, that's what the questions that we're raising, like how do we define innovation? What is innovation? What fields are good for innovation? And that approach in Iceland is very narrow. So that's our, we're raising awareness of that you have to take a wider lens on this issue. And also we, of course, even though we don't like the talent discussion, but it's also important. The Icelandic society and the labor market are losing out on opportunities and benefits. So we also take on these discourses as well to get positive responses from the government, to make them aware that they are losing out on opportunities. But if they do approach it differently, they're also promoting justice and fairness. And here is the results of this one of the matching funds. And as you can see, the blue line, only men. This is just the board of directors. It depends on how you look at the data, who is getting the money. And if you see on the top line, that's the board of directors. Okay, 60% is a mixed group, 40% all men. But then you go to the lower level of the directors, and you see half of them are men, and 30% are mixed group, only 70% women. And then you come to the founders, you know, who owns the idea originally, 2/3, those are men. So what we did first was analyzing the applicant, and we saw that it was like 50-50. So, you know, women are doing the housework, you know, applying for funding. But so when we looked at it more deeply, this is the outcomes. And the next slide. And here you can see that overall men are in majority of the founders and those that direct those companies. And this is the number of the people behind those numbers. So you can see 60% of the applicants were men, 40% women, but when you look deeper, this is not the reality. So basically that money is just funding men's ideas, men's innovation. That is of course important, but we need to generate jobs for a different, from other people in the public. And again, we're losing out on talent. The next slide. Yeah, that's you, Steinunn.
Yeah, so I've seen we've had some questions on care work and unpaid labor in the home. This is what we're moving into next. So if we don't answer your questions in the next 2-3 slides, then we'll take that discussion after this. But there have been, as in recessions before, there have been now signs of austerity measures in the coming years, and these measures are always in the areas of public services where women are the majority of employees. And in these same areas of public service, the workload has increased enormously during the pandemic. And we know that cuts in social welfare and healthcare services mean negative effects on the service users and employees. We also know that the need for the social infrastructure will continue to exist. It doesn't go away in a recession. It's even more in these times. And we know that the work and responsibilities will move into the homes and to women if you could cut down these services. So cuts in these services will affect the participation of women in the labor market and have a negative effect on economic growth, as well as negative effect on their financial security and stability. And it can put women in and people in general in vulnerable positions, for example, against violence and other abuse. So we point out that we need to rethink what kind of society we want to live in before imposing these austerity measures. And there is now more than ever a need to nurture the social infrastructure to promote employment participation and security of all people in society. And as this picture says, it says austerity is never free. So it's basically cuts in these sectors, they come at a price. And this is I just wanted to give you an example of, I know you don't understand anything that this says, but it's just the way we wrap the information for the public. So this says, we always started with a slogan, as you've seen in the other slides. This one says, exciting job opportunities, salaries, none. Then the middle part explains what we mean by the slogan. There we explain how cuts in these services will mean that the work will move into the household and mostly onto the hands of women. And then we always ended with suggesting a solution. And in the case of this slide, then it would be, what about taxing the rich and use the revenue to secure a stable and good welfare system? Just an idea. But yeah, this should cover some of the questions that we received earlier. But so we know that, and we point out that most research regarding household work and care suggests that women take more responsibility than men do. Research also suggests that the workload regarding housework and care has increased because of the pandemic. For Iceland, we don't have a lot of data supporting this. There have been some smaller surveys done, but people working within the system are very aware of this. But Iceland has one of the highest ratio of persons taking care of sick, disabled, old and fragile relatives in Europe. So this is a time-consuming unpaid work that influences opportunities for paid work, income, work stamina, and work development. This is this we knew before the pandemic. And it is therefore so important that measures during the pandemic didn't increase this gender imbalance of unpaid work. In the case of Iceland, it was essential that schools stayed open, which they did for the largest part. And we know that if it came to homeschooling, that would largely, it would move into the households and mostly into the hands of women, on top of increased workloads in the home because of the family members staying at home more than usual. But then we also had some good measures, such as paid guarantee during quarantine. But we pointed out that this failed to include everyone who needed the support, leaving the most vulnerable behind. As it didn't include parents that needed to isolate themselves with kids and teenagers with disability and long-term illnesses. Because of the service towards these groups was lacking, closed mostly during the pandemic. And this is what we pointed out earlier. If you cut down the services, in this case, just because of the pandemic, but you see that the need for the service is still there, and it moves into the household and into the hands of largely women. And these parents and caretakers, they either had to rely on a sympathetic employer or leave the labor market altogether. So a pay guarantee during quarantine could have included these parents and caretakers. And it would have needed to be on individual basis as well, so that mothers wouldn't end up leaving the workplace disproportionately compared to fathers.
So just if you put the previous slide again, so that slogan there is like, health issues are not the only outcomes of COVID, right? Outcomes, efterkost.
Yeah.
Not health issues are not the only problems because of COVID, or something like that. Yeah. But to conclude, I think we've said this all, but these were the biggest challenges that we have. COVID had great impact on employment, impact on welfare system, and women's health and economic safety. And we were, as we've been showing you, the economic response, we only show you part of it, but in general, it was gender biased, and it was intersecting with other power relations in society, such as class and nationality. It was interesting that Steinunn, for example, mentioned homeschooling earlier. It's only not impacting, increasing the workload on women, but it's also changing the position of the children. Not all children have parents that are in the position of teaching kids in Icelandic schools. We have a big proportion of the country. I think around 15% are foreign-born nationals. So the pandemic was increasing those inequalities. So we were talking about, but mostly in concern to the economic policies, that we need to do more to benefit all genders, and particularly regarding job opportunities and preventing poverty. And we were emphasizing on providing satisfying wages and work conditions for people who work in healthcare, schools, and welfare, because these are, in our opinion, very underpaid sectors, mostly dominated by women and foreign workers, foreign-born workers. And we were also raising, we were also focusing on the future welfare cuts, that this was a threat that we would not want to see. But now we have a government that is forming, so it's going to be interesting how they are going to tackle these issues in the following weeks. So we have a lot to do in the following weeks here in Iceland. But we wanted to open up the floor for discussions, and we wanted to hear from you, like your thoughts. Can we improve our work? Is there anything that you thought there that we are lacking, and we always are seeking to improve our work? And we also want to hear if you have any experience of gender budgeting activism within your own context. And if you don't, do you see any potentials on how to do that in your national or local context, and how would you do it? So thank you so much for having us. It's been a great pleasure, and it's great to have been interacting with you in the chat, but I hope you can turn on your cameras and unmute and share with us your thoughts. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Finnborg and Steinunn. I'm doing a little applause from here. The discussion will continue, and I let's see, I'm going to just change my view to make it possible for me to see everyone. Yeah, so if before I move on with my questions, then would there be someone who would be curious to ask a question themselves, or ask a question from let's say our little group as a whole, or just make a comment about how it is where you're from, since we have people from all over the world here. All right. Lovely. The floor will be open throughout this entire conversation, and feel free to ask questions in the chat here as well. But from my end, I would open up the conversation from a slightly different angle, since I feel like money related and finance related, especially personal finance related questions, have been kind of coming into the mainstream, and from a feminist angle as well. I would be curious to hear either from both of you or just one of you, what does feminist personal spending look like? If you think about gender budgeting within the household as a feminist household, what does that mean in your case? How do you spend your money in a feminist way?
Well, that's a big question. I've never thought of that, but yeah.
Wow.
So if you're talking about a heteronormative relationship household,
it could be queer as fuck.
Yeah. But if you think about the heteronormative relationship, you know that the main caretaker is mostly spending. So isn't it correct, Steinunn? Women's money goes into the household. Yeah. I think research shows that. And into the children, buying clothes, and men's salary is more, their own. It's the same with time, and it's also, you could extend it to that. Women's time is a shared resource, but men's time is privately owned. We see that in Icelandic research, that like women use flexible working hours to take care of the family and the children, while men use them to do extracurricular activities like to go to golf and sport. And you see that at least in the University of Iceland. And we see it also in the labor market here. 30% of women in Iceland are part-time. And 1/3 of that, at least from a research from 2012, shows that they are doing it because of taking care of the home, taking care of children, caring responsibilities. While men, they are 13%, in the data from 2019, they were 13% part-time. And from this survey in 2012, none of them in Iceland answered that they're part-time because of family responsibilities. So I think it would be great if we all could have 100% jobs, that would be feminist, Of course, I would love to see fewer working hours, and we would share all those responsibilities, both when it comes to spending, but also,
the time.
our time.
Yeah.
So, and of course, then we can also extend it to you should, of course, buy fair trade and stop shopping in big national capitalistic companies, etc. But yeah, it's a great question, Sanna. It's a really food for thought.
Yes, gladly. Gladly, feel free to ask about or ask around.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the comment that I recently looked at the difference in pensions between women and men in Estonia. And the interesting thing is that our pension system consists of 3 pillars. One is the state pension, and they're actually maybe but we have a huge salary gap in Estonia, right? But the state pension gap is very small. It's actually the smallest in Europe. But when it comes to pillar 2 and 3, which are the private pension schemes or the voluntary pension schemes, then the differences are very big. So I was thinking of this, your questions about private gender budgeting in the private sphere, Sanna, that maybe we should have a campaign in Estonia that men should, collect private pensions to women's pillars instead, because actually this is it's like an unfair, a very gender neutral pension scheme that totally ignores the lower pay of women. So, for example, the second pillar is that you put 2% of your income to the pension scheme, and then the state contributes 4% more. And this means that they automatically contribute more money to men's pension schemes than women's pension schemes. Mm-hmm. So if we can't make the government to fix it, we should maybe have a private campaign for men to start to put in more money to their whatever, sort of fix it from the other side. That was just the idea I got when I looked at the statistics. But I haven't looked at the COVID schemes, but in 2008, the financial crisis we had then I looked at the family benefit cuts, and they had a hugely disproportional impact on women. So a lot of everything from the sick benefit to stay at home with kids, or I don't remember anymore. I think it was the parental, different parental schemes were cut, where 90% of the beneficiaries are women. So it was very sort of hard blow to women's income. I think the only benefit that was cut from men was the father's leave, which was very small by then. So that was I mean, in terms of money, it was very small, and all the billions were taken from women recipients.
Lovely, thank you. And I absolutely agree that that kind of a campaign would make sense. So I hope someone's taking notes. Maybe Nila on my right. I wanted to ask if you know of any EU level agreements or or let's say mandates perhaps that have been passed at a high level that member states that don't have a local gender budgeting initiative could use to argue for such changes? What's the situation at, let's say, the EU structure level?
So I don't think there's any mandate to do, like, I think OECD, for example, is encouraging their countries to do gender budgeting, but I'm not sure about the European Union level. We're not part of the European Union, so we unfortunately do not follow it. But I think, you know, having it in the Public Finance Act is a big step here in Iceland. I know it's in Austria, for example, it's been in the constitution since 2006, but so I think we've not come that far that it's part of the legislation in most countries in Europe. But I would like to respond to Kati's comment. But Steinunn, do you want to respond to the European? No. Sorry, we're very focused on Iceland. But Kati, you seem to have a quite similar pension system as we have in Iceland. But I think that here it's the companies that provide the 4%, not the government, right, Steinunn?
Yeah, so we have governmental funds for like state and local government employees, but then on the private market, it's companies that
provide the yeah. So we have these 3 pillars as well, and it's the second pillar that you were talking about, that the government is encouraging everyone to move there. It sounds like they're trying to not have the state system in the future. You know, they want people to make their own, you know, future benefits or future funds. But then again, now in COVID, they were encouraging people to take out these funds and use them, you know, to, you know, solve the financial issues that we have at the moment. And like, what about the future? What about, like, those who did it were mostly like men with higher salary that had actual funds and were just like using it to invest in concrete or buying a house or something, a second house. I don't know. We haven't. This is I'm speaking very freely here, but if you imagine someone who is like in lower pay and especially in a need of money right now because of COVID, for example, because of a job loss, what's going to happen to them when they are turning 67? You know, it's a short-term vision of a problem, but it wasn't solving our problems here, because those that were needing the most of the assistance don't have those funds, you know, and don't have higher funds. But yeah, we have been raising awareness of this issue, not us, but the Women's Rights Association. We have had on October 24th, we have like this national women walkout. We call it Women Stay Off. It started in 1974 when women like gathered and quit their jobs because they're not getting paid. Today, women can stop working at, I think, 2:30, because they because of the gender pay gap, and this has been an issue in the past years. Like women's lower pay, the pay gap that we have now, and you know, women are taking breaks from the labor market to do all this unpaid work. You know, having babies, and you know, we need babies to sustain the economy in the future and social infrastructure. But we're punishing them when they get older for this, all the work that they've been doing. So we've been raising these issues, and having a campaign in Estonia. I'm looking forward to it. Please keep us posted. It sounds great. But yeah, how you worked out. I think, Steinunn, do you want to respond? Add something?
No, I think you covered all of it, but it is like pensions are a big part of the economy, and as well, like everything that's happening now in terms of pay gap will kind of just like spiral into the future with pensions. So it's a big deal.
Yeah, and it's so frustrating because we see it coming, we know it's happening, and we just keep on building schemes that will reinforce it. It's like, I actually forgot our third pillar, which gives you a huge tax benefit if you put your salary into it. And again, as men put more money into it, they get more return from the tax. It's like they get the cash benefit for, you know, being richer and actually being able to invest in their future and in their pension schemes. So it's like we're fueling, you know, the fire. And we have the same as you have with the second pillar, which is, I think it's more of a coincidence in Estonia that we had a a pension reform just when COVID hit, that people could actually withdraw their money from the second pillar, and a lot of people used it. So we don't, yeah, it's basically taking money out of the pension system. So what will hit us in 20 years time, we don't really know yet. But I guess if we would have a campaign, you know, for leaving work, in Estonia, women should leave after breakfast, I guess, because the wage gap is so huge. So it actually has improved a bit over the last year, but it's still the highest in Europe.
Since I know that you, Finnborg, and I'm assuming that you, Steinunn, also are aware of that a little bit, I would be curious to ask, mostly this conversation is focused on state level conversations and budgeting. When it comes to organization level, whether it's small organization, mid-level, larger organization, private or public sector, then what kinds of steps would you recommend us, the people working in different organizations, to take to make it possible to bring that new gender budgeting knowledge that we now have, and either begin those conversations or take really concrete steps within organizations to ensure that the outcomes of budgets or any sort of resource allocation don't reinforce gender inequality?
Yeah. I think, Finnborg, do you have, I'm thinking
Yes.
It's important to, I think, first look at the system within your national context and like the available data, if any, and see kind of what the how that looks like. And
I can add to that. So yeah, what we've been doing in the academic context, and I think can be benefit, and I'm also doing with my students I have a course called Applied Gender Studies and a master's level at the University of Iceland. We do targeted projects. So if you have a feeling about something, like within your organization, like this isn't, you know, what are the outcomes of this? You know, if you don't have the potential to do it on a bigger scale, you know, do a targeted project, do an assessment of that, and what's the outcomes there? Are there any gender biases? Are there any gender outcomes, or benefiting privileging some group over other? And that's what my students are doing in collaboration with the city of Reykjavik, the central government, the government offices. They're also doing it at the University of Iceland. So I think that's always a start. It's a jump start, you know, and also to create a discussion, raise awareness within the organization. Like, even like I'm doing this collaboration project with 7 universities in Europe, and one of them is looking at workload allocation models in a university. Another one is looking at the small grants. And I draw this from my experience of my PhD, where I was looking at funding from the state to the universities, within the universities, and how it's like influencing gender. And this is like, it was a PhD. It takes a lot of effort to get those numbers and look at and it's also often like what policies are steering the resources. So often we don't necessarily need the money issues. You can just take a step back and look at the policies. What's the objective? Like, who is it benefiting? So I think, in my experience, starting somewhere is a first issue. Start somewhere with something targeted, because you need to chop it down, because it can be so overwhelming and difficult to get information.
And it does sound like gathering data and having as much as a an understanding of where the money and where the resources are going at the present moment, who is it benefiting, would be the first step towards making your argument, whether in a smaller group or in front of a larger panel. I would be very curious to hear from those of you present here that are working on whether the private or the public sector about any initiatives in your communities or workspaces about how this is done or what the challenge that you're facing are. Because I think, and this is perhaps my subjective reaction, but in a way, the Icelandic situation it feels quite different from the way it is here, or probably in other post-Soviet spaces, since it seems like there's already a shared understanding about the value of gender budgeting, whereas if that issue is raised, and when that issue is raised here in the Estonian context, it would receive and has received already a relatively intense backlash about potentially preferring women. So I would be curious to hear, besides the inherent morality and need for it, and the, let's say, the value of it morally, are there any, let's say, fiscal or any technocratic pros that you've seen in entrenched gender budgeting projects? What have then, let's say, been the positive outcomes of such initiatives, whether at a local or state level?
But Sanna, before you open the floor, I want to add something about gender budgeting. What we've been finding is that showing where money is going, the resources is going, I think it's actually helped the feminist, advocating for feminist approach. Because when we're talking about gender norms or, stereotypes, people are like, this is just, or rape culture, this is just something, you cannot, grasp it. When you talk about money and resources, people are like, you have something, So I actually think, like, if you're meeting resistances, I think this is a perfect approach, showing where the money is going, because people understand money, and it's you meet them, and I think so I just want to add that.
Lovely. So if we don't have more comments here, then I will just kind of like briefly reiterate what I was asking before. In the case of Iceland, have you seen any local or nationwide positive impacts of gender budgeting successes? What are the feel-good stories that you could tell us about the success of the consensus that's been reached in Iceland in a way?
Well, we saw changes to the follow-up economic responses of COVID-19, right, Steinunn? But that's we're not taking all the honor for that, because the labor unions were also talking about it. What was it again? My memory is quite short at the moment. It was something investment related. I think it was like a VAT discount. They added some more women-dominated industries to encourage people to buy those services. And they acknowledged that they're also, it was also positive. They acknowledged that their investment efforts were not good enough from a gender perspective. So, but at the local level, we see that a lot, especially at the city of Reykjavik, where they're doing gender budgeting, we're doing especially analysis of the services, social services. I think they're doing a lot there based on their analysis. So it's like they use the data to direct their policies, and they use an intersectional or a gender and other inequalities approach. So often it's not gender intersected, but they're thinking about inequalities there. But that's a tendency. They do these in the soft issues, the soft issues, the services, but we don't see it in the. I'm not acknowledging this, but it's a good term. But what we met in the university, sorry, Steinunn, you were saying? Yeah.
No, I was just going to say that I feel like the main success story has been like just getting the public's attention on because I feel like the gender budgeting started after the financial crisis, and just getting people kind of in on it, like this now after this COVID crisis has been yeah, that's been a positive, I think, as well.
Lovely, thank you. One question with regards to the intersectionality that you mentioned before that comes to my head is, have you noticed whether in your data or in your daily experience working in this field, or let's say engaging with this field as your hobby, as you said before, have you noticed that is there a tendency when gender budgeting is taken into effect for that wealth or those resources to be making their way into the hands of those women that are already wealthy or that are already educationally privileged? Is there kind of recreation of privilege even within gender budgeting, with the resources making their way to women?
I think that the experts at the ministry are very aware of those issues, because we're thinking about, when we think about, you know, gender, women, they always consider like the whole position that women are not just the same group, like they really focused on a class, for example, because women are in those, the majority of those working forces and working sectors. So I think the experts are quite aware of these within, at least that's my feeling. But other issues, those are lacking, other intersecting power relations are lacking, right, Steinunn? Like we don't look at ethnicity or language, but this is also like in certain issues when we talk about, for example, violence in the government, these issues come up. So it depends on the subject area, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think often it's just the access to information and such that is lacking. So it's maybe the services or the measures end up benefiting women of certain class or nationality or whatever it is, just because of the access to the information or to the measures is not good enough. And this is something that we've criticized and will continue to do.
Thank you. I have one more closing question. I think we might have time for another comment or question from someone here as well instead. Yeah, so my closing question would be, if both of you were in charge of the Icelandic budget, then we've talked about what we would like to put money towards and what kinds of like expenditures would make sense. But I would be curious to hear, what would you, and feel free to answer this on your own, and those of you listening, I would be curious to hear how you would answer that personally, but what would you like to take money away from? Taking money away from which areas do you feel like would benefit gender equality the most?
Steinunn?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'm always kind of interested in making the cake bigger rather than like giving someone else a part of it. Then like I think we could, for my personal like I think we could get money like as we've mentioned in the slides as well, like tax the rich and just like, and just be more aware of in the way that we divide the money rather than yeah, that's more personal.
Yeah, I agree, and that's what our point in the COVID-19 project. And also, for example, some of the innovation grants were going to stable and big companies, unlike to produce to do innovation in food production, for example. And we were like, do they really need that money? So, you know, use the money more wisely. And I agree with Steinunn. I don't want to minimize the government's budget. I like it to be. I love taxes and so we can be able to provide, you know, good social and health services. So I think, you know, reorganize that, the thinking behind it, and, you know, tax the rich.
Lovely. Thank you so much. So we are going to close soon now. Before we leave, since I started this session saying that this is an active learning space. So firstly, I would invite Steinunn and Finnborg to drop your social media or any kinds of other links where people can follow your work and what you do, so that we can kind of continue this process and this relationship. But those of you listening, I would be so appreciative if you commented with one sort of like comment with one legislation or piece of law change that you would propose in the country where you're from to support gender budgeting as part of the normal working of things. So make it as silly as possible, but yeah, please write down one change that you would implement in your country, taking lessons from what Finnborg and Steinunn have been telling us. I think it was also good feedback to them who've just been giving us this amazing information for a good long while. I'll do the same. We can, and also take a couple of good breaths. I'm sure that you've been as still as I have been here. Ooh, wow, that was a lot. So yes, share your idea here, and I'll do the same.
This is a great idea. I'm really looking forward to reading what you have to say.
Definitely.
Lovely. Get your ideas out there. Nice. Maybe I'll write one silly idea here as well, just to take the pressure off people. Nela is really out to piss off some people here. Damn. Awesome. So as we have the ideas being posted here, I definitely encourage all of you to write your ideas here. I would just like to extend my gratitude to Finnborg and Steinunn for making the time to have this conversation with us, to share your expertise and your knowledge with us. It's been such a gift to understand, you know, kind of get a glimpse into the world that we could have, that already exists in some space of the world, and also to kind of get these concrete steps that make it feel so much more feasible for us to implement, both here in Estonia and in the other countries that we have present, and here as well. Tax the rich is kind of what I'm taking away from this. Tax the rich, get that data, you know, understand where the money is going, follow the money, and we're already halfway there. Then beautiful. We have so many more events going to happen as a part of TALFF. I think Nela will be the perfect person to tell us about that. Thank you everyone so much for listening, and again, thank you to Steinunn and Finnborg for being here with us.